Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. So, you sent this over everyday conversations, learning American English, and at first glance you think, okay, pretty basic stuff, right? It's from the U.S. Department of State. Looks like it's for middle schoolers learning English.
Right.
But the thing is, and this is what we're going to dig into, these simple dialogues, they're packed with insights into how Americans actually talk, like the subtle stuff, and even the cultural things that we just do without thinking.
Oh, absolutely. When you have material designed for people learning the language, it makes those hidden rules so obvious, things native speakers never even question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission today, and this is going to be fun, is to go beyond the basic words and grammar and really unpack those aha moments. Like, you might think you know this stuff, but trust me, there are going to be some eye-openers here. We're diving into three main sections: how Americans do introductions and small talk, then navigating everyday stuff around town, and finally, all the language we use for pastimes and activities. So let's kick things off with those introductions and small talk.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the resource starts with formal greetings.
Yeah.
Your good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Now, you might think this is straightforward, but it's interesting how they point out that good evening usually starts around 6 p.m. or sunset.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right. And they make this clear distinction. Good night is not a greeting. It's only for saying goodbye.
Which, when you think about it, it's true. We don't really use it as a hello at all.
Totally. Then there's the handshake. They emphasize a firm handshake, 2 to 3 seconds, just enough time to say, nice to meet you. It's like second nature here. But it's interesting how that physical contact plays into first impressions.
Oh, for sure. That little bit of physical connection, it's a big deal in American culture. Shows you're confident, engaged. Even the timing matters. Too quick and it seems dismissive, but too long. That gets a bit weird. It's that whole American thing about being direct,
Right. And what about saying you are welcome after someone says thank you? That's the formal way. But then we have all these informal responses. Don't mention it. No problem. Happy to help. It's funny how many ways we have to basically downplay receiving thanks.
It is interesting. I guess it depends on who you're talking to and how formal the situation is. Shows a level of comfort, maybe? Like you don't need a big fuss made over a small favor.
Well, I think it's no big deal. Okay, moving into more informal greetings and goodbyes. We've got hi, of course, and they even point out you can stretch it out, like hi, to show you're really happy to see someone.
That's funny.
Yeah, and then there's the more standard hello and how's it going instead of how are you. But notice they mention that rising intonation on and you. That signals you actually care about the answer. It's not just a formality.
It's like those unspoken things we do with our voices, right? Like that stretched out hi, or the way our tone goes up at the end.
Yeah.
Those add so much extra meaning.
Totally. And then we've got where are you off to?
Yeah.
Instead of where are you going? And that one ends on a lower tone because it's a real question, like you're looking for information. And they point out a little conversational shortcut. If it's obvious where you're going, like to the library, after being asked, you can just skip the I'm going. It's like we just get to the point.
Which, if you think about it, that happens a lot in casual speech. We drop words all the time when the meaning is clear.
Yeah, totally. And then we have, oh no, a classic way to show sympathy. Like when someone says they have a big exam coming up, it's like a quick way to say, that sucks, without a long speech.
Right.
And then the good old see you later, the informal goodbye. So much packed into such simple phrases,
Definitely. Like that see you later implies you'll probably see them again, a casual kind of connection.
Exactly. Okay, let's get into formal introductions now. We've got Margaret introducing Mr. Wilson to Dr. Smith. Notice that upward inflection on Mr. Wilson when she's talking directly to him. It's like she's calling his name within the sentence.
Yeah, it's subtle, but it makes it clear who she's talking to, even though there are multiple people there.
Exactly. And then the difference between I'd like, meaning I would like or I want, and just plain I like.
Right.
That tiny little D makes it sound more polite, less demanding.
Oh yeah, for sure. We use contractions all the time when we speak, but knowing when to use the full form is important, especially in more formal settings.
Totally. And they point out how we naturally stress new information. When Margaret says Dr. Smith is an economist, the emphasis goes on economist because that's the new bit of information. And they even break down how to pronounce economist, 4 syllables, stress on the second one. Economist.
I mean, it's interesting how we don't even think about that, but where we put the stress in a word can totally change the meaning.
Yeah, it's true. And then there's the use of just with the simple past tense to show something happened very recently, like he just finished writing a book.
Right.
But, as they point out, you can also use it with the present perfect tense. Like, that little word just does a lot of work.
It does. It's all about that immediacy, right? Whether you want to emphasize the action itself or how it relates to right now.
Totally. Okay, back to those compound nouns, like development program. The main stress goes on development, which seems to be the rule for these types of phrases.
Yeah, usually the first word gets the emphasis in compound nouns. Helps you figure out what the phrase actually means.
Right, it all clicks into place. And lastly, in this formal introduction, they use the phrase by any chance, meaning possibly. And that upward inflection at the end makes it a yes-no question, like they're looking for confirmation. It's a softer way of asking.
Absolutely. Adding that by any chance makes it less demanding, just checking if something is true.
Exactly. All right, let's shift gears to informal introductions now. Jim asks, who's the tall woman? And they point out, of course, that whose, meaning who is, sounds exactly the same as whose, but it has a totally different meaning.
Yeah, those can trip you up if you're not careful. You really have to pay attention to the context to figure out what they mean.
Totally. And then Charles uses this negative quotient. Didn't you meet her at Steve's party? He's actually surprised that Jim hasn't met Mary, so it's like he's assuming the answer will be yes.
Right, it's like turning the question upside down. You expect them to agree, not disagree.
Exactly. And then we have this slightly odd emphasis, I wasn't at Steve's party. Normally, prepositions aren't stressed, but here, a dad gets the emphasis because it's the key reason why Jim didn't meet Mary.
Yeah, it's like the location is the most important part of that sentence.
Right, it's all about the where. And then they show the standard way to introduce people casually. Mary, this is my friend Jim, and Jim, this is Mary, followed by the ever-present, nice to meet you.
It's like a social script, right? We all know how to do it.
Absolutely. And then Mary replies with a casual, sure, when Jim offers her a drink. Just a simple yes.
Yeah, sure, is our go-to for agreeing to something informally.
Totally. All right, time for a time check. Dialogue 1 to 5 focuses on what time is it. We learned that 7:15 is a common way to say 7.15, as well as the more straightforward 7:15. And the general pattern is a quarter past the hour. They also remind us that context is important, like mentioning evening traffic helps you figure out if it's 7:15 a.m. or p.m.
Right, those little clues make all the difference. And it's interesting how we still use those fractions of an hour, like a quarter past or half past. It's very traditional.
Yeah, it is. And this dialogue also shows how we use phrases like, don't worry, don't stress, we're fine, we will be on time when we're feeling a bit rushed or anxious.
It's like we're trying to calm each other down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they give us 2 ways to say 7.30, either 7:30 or half past 7. So many ways to say the same thing. Plus, a good definition of rush hour. Those super busy commuting times in the morning and evening.
Yeah, you got to know about rush hour if you're going to navigate any American city.
For sure. Okay, next up is a phone call. We see that casual phone greeting. Hi, name, it's name. Even though it technically means it is, it's just how we talk on the phone.
Right, it's like a shortcut. It just means I am. It's so ingrained that we don't even think about it.
Exactly. And when Alice answers, oh, hi, John, that upward inflection shows she's pleasantly surprised to hear from him. Tone of voice matters so much, right?
It really does. Our tone can express so much, from excitement to sarcasm.
Totally. Then John asks, I was wondering if you'd like to. It's his indirect way of asking, do you want to? And they point out that upward inflection at the end can make it sound less confident, like he's hesitant to impose.
Yeah, it softens the request, makes it easier for the other person to say no if they want to.
Exactly. Good point. And Alice's response, sure, I'd love to, is super enthusiastic. The love to really emphasizes her agreement.
Definitely. That love to adds an extra layer of enthusiasm, like she's really excited.
Totally. And John continues to be indirect, suggesting, I was thinking about that new comedy. He's leaving space for Alice to give her opinion. It's very collaborative.
Yeah, it's a nice way to make plans together, not just dictate what you're doing.
Right. Sounds great, is Alice's informal seal of approval. And then, I'll pick you up, is clarified as meaning, I'll come to your house so we can go together. Those phrasal verbs can be tricky, so it's good to have that explanation.
Yeah, phrasal verbs are tough for language learners because the meaning isn't always obvious from the individual words.
Absolutely. So what happens when you miss something someone says? Dialogue 1 to 7, can you say that again? Gives us a whole bunch of ways to ask for repetition. You've got, what did you say? Can you repeat that, please? Excuse me, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
And the last 2 have that upward inflection that makes them sound like questions.
It's good to have a variety of phrases, you know? Some are more formal than others, so you can choose the right one for the situation.
Absolutely. And they also give us some more specific ways to ask for clarification, like, can you please repeat that? Can you spell that for me? Can you please write down the address for me? Ooh, super useful for when you need to get the details right.
Yeah, those are helpful when you need a specific piece of information clarified.
Definitely. And then we get some vocabulary for bad phone reception, cutting out, the line is breaking up, I am losing you, and the classic, the call dropped. We've all been there, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's so frustrating when you can't hear properly.
Totally. And they point out that talk to you later is basically the phone version of see you later.
Yeah.
Just a casual way to end the conversation. Plus, a quick definition of reception in the context of cell phone service, mentioning situations where it might be bad.
Like in a tunnel or a basement.
Exactly. Okay, dialogue 138, coincidences. We see Meg run into an old friend. She says, well, hello there. Well, putting extra emphasis on hello to show her surprise.
Yeah, adding that there, and the emphasis makes it clear she wasn't expecting to see this person.
Right, it's all in the delivery. And then we have the classic, long time no see. Perfect for those moments when you haven't seen someone in ages.
It's a standard phrase. Everyone knows what it means.
Absolutely. And then we get the exclamation, what I, which can express all sorts of strong emotions like surprise, joy, or even disappointment. They give the example, you always did have good taste, with the stress on did for emphasis. It's like a playful tease because they both like the same shirt.
It's funny how we can change the meaning of a sentence just by stressing a different word.
Yeah, totally. And finally, the universal, what a small world. Perfect for those surprising moments when you realize how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, it's that feeling of, wow, I can't believe I ran into you here.
Exactly. All right, rounding out our look at introductions with a weather report. We get a definition of a cold front, that band of cold air that moves through, and the very useful phrase, supposed to talk about expected events, like, I thought this cold front was supposed to pass.
Yeah, supposed to is tricky because it can mean both expected to and obligated to.
Right, you have to pay attention to the context. And then we get some informal ways to say yes, yeah, yep, Good to know for casual conversations. Plus, the super practical phrase, that's what I read online this morning, which you can adapt to heard on the radio or saw on TV.
Perfect for telling people where you got your information from.
Totally. And then some synonyms for cold, chill, freezing, cold. Always good to expand your vocabulary. And they explain wind chill, how the wind makes it feel even colder than the actual temperature.
Oh yeah, wind chill can be brutal.
No kidding. And lastly, they explain the phrasal verb driving down, meaning forcing to be lower, like how high demand is driving down housing prices.
Phrasal verbs are another challenge for language learners. They can have so many different meanings.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's move on to our next section, around town. Our first stop is a restaurant. The waiter asks, can I start you off with something to drink? With that upward inflection at the end, because it's a yes-no question.
Classic waiter question.
Totally. Anna emphasizes both I'll and lemonade in her response, and I'll have lemonade, to make her choice clear.
Yeah, we use stress to highlight the important parts of our sentences.
Exactly. And in the waiter's next question, are you ready to order, or do you need a few minutes? The word or signals a choice. Notice that upward inflection on order and downward inflection on minutes.
It's like he's guiding you through the options with his voice.
Totally. When Ralph orders, the stress falls on the food items. Tomato soup, roast beef, mashed potatoes, peas, and as we saw before, in compound food names, the stress usually on the second word, like roast beef.
Makes sense. The food is the most important part of the order.
Right. And Ralph just says, well done, please, skipping the subject and verb. It's like a conversational shortcut.
Yeah, we do that a lot in casual speech, especially when the meaning is clear from the context.
Totally. Annie uses just to say she doesn't want a starter, and I'll just have the fish.
It implies she only wants the main course, nothing else.
Right. Okay, our next scenario is at the doctor's office. The doctor asks, what seems to be the problem? Which is a formal way of saying what's wrong.
Yeah.
And it has that downward inflection typical of what questions.
It's a very doctory way to ask.
Totally. Kathy starts by saying, well, drawing it out a bit like, well.
It's that classic hesitation. We all do it. Like, let me think for a second.
Exactly. And notice how she uses a before each symptom. A bad cough, a sore throat, a headache.
Yeah, that's important for learners to know how we use articles with symptoms.
Absolutely. She uses about to give an approximate time. About 3 days now.
It signals that it's not an exact number, just an estimate.
Right. And the doctor's instructions are all in the simple present tense, like commands. Take aspirin, get rest, make sure, call me.
It's very direct, no messing around.
Totally. And they explain that still sick just means continue to be sick.
Simple and straightforward.
Okay, moving on to asking directions. Mark starts with, could you tell me? Which is a little more polite than, can you tell me?
Using could makes it sound less demanding.
Exactly. He asks, could you tell me where the library is? Now, there's a stress on library because that's the key information. And notice the word order. Subject library comes before verb is, unlike the direct question, where is the library?
Yeah, that word order difference can be confusing for learners.
Totally. Nancy points and says, yes, it's that way, emphasizing that to show the direction.
Yeah, stressing demonstrative pronouns like that helps make it clear what you're referring to.
Right. Mark explains he's new in town and doesn't know his way around. And Nancy says, oh, I know how you feel. Stressing feel to emphasize the shared emotion.
Showing empathy.
Exactly. And we see that indirect question word order again when Mark says, I still don't know where everything is. Subject to everything before verb is.
It's a consistent pattern.
All right, next up is calling for help. Peter starts with a surprised, hey, followed by an urgent description of a car accident. That hey is like an alarm bell.
It gets your attention immediately.
Totally. He asks, is anyone hurt? With an upward inflection and a worried tone.
Yeah, you can hear the concern in his voice.
Sure. The dialogue explains what 911 is and what kind of information the operator will ask for. Very important to know in an emergency.
Absolutely, those details can save lives.
They point out the stressed words in Peter's report. Car accident, post office, Charles Street.
Clear and concise information is key in an emergency.
Exactly. He says, it just happened, emphasizing just to show it was very recent.
It highlights the immediacy of the situation.
And when he asks, what did they say? The stress is on say, and the question have that downward inflection we expect from what questions.
Yeah, those patterns become second nature after a while.
All right, moving on to the supermarket. Louise suggests, how about baking some cookies today? By using how about followed by a verb ending in ing.
It's a very common way to make suggestions.
Julia's shows she's thinking about it, maybe not fully convinced. Then she decides, that's a great idea, and emphasizing great to show her enthusiasm.
You can practically hear her smiling.
Totally. They explain that the recipe calls for means the recipe says we need, and that it can also be used for weather forecasts.
Yeah, it's a versatile phrase.
And when they list the ingredients, flour, sugar, and butter, there's a slight pause and stress on each item.
Helps the listener keep track of the list.
Louise says, why don't you get the flour and sugar? Use why don't you to make a suggestion or give a direction.
It's a softer way of saying, go get those things.
Right. And finally, a definition of aisle with that silent S explaining it's a walkway in a supermarket. Basic vocabulary, but important for getting around.
Yeah, you got to know your way around the store.
In our next scenario, running errands, the receptionist greets Claire with, hi there, with that upward inflection after hi and downward inflection after there. It sounds very welcoming.
It's all about that friendly tone.
Totally. Claire responds with a simple, sure, meaning okay. They point out the structure, get have plus object plus past participle for describing services, like get my hair cut, have my new pants hemmed, have my car serviced.
It's a passive voice construction, focusing on the action being done rather than the person doing it.
Exactly. The receptionist asks, is there anything else? To see if Claire needs further assistance. Very typical in customer service.
Yeah, they want to make sure you're happy.
Claire says, before my long drive home, putting emphasis and a bit of a humorous tone on home because her car needs servicing before the trip.
A little bit of sarcasm there.
Right. The receptionist's response, no problem, means don't worry. And that drawn out no new problem shows understanding and reassurance.
It's like they're saying, I got you. It's all good.
Totally. All right, now we're at the post office. The postal clerk asks, what can I do for you today? With that downward inflection at the end because it's a what question.
Consistent pattern there.
Yep. When presenting another option, the clerk emphasizes or you can send it priority to highlight the alternative.
Makes the choice clear.
They point out the two ways the clerk says the price, $11.35 and $11.35. Both are common.
Good to know both ways.
The customer says, oh yeah, meaning I just remembered something. often followed by I almost forgot.
That sudden realization moment.
And the clerk says your total comes to, which is a standard way to say the cost is.
It's the final amount you need to pay.
Exactly. Next up is catching up after class. Sarah greets Greg with a casual hey, and then asks, how did your physics exam go?
Just checking in.
Greg says, I'm just glad it's over. Stressing glad and in using just for emphasis, meaning he's super relieved.
Yeah, just can really ant up the feeling.
Sarah then asks, how about you? With a downward inflection because she's going to follow up with a more specific question.
The tone of voice sets up the next part of the conversation.
To point out the common contractions, how did and your pronounces your.
Very common in everyday speech.
Sarah asks, do you feel like grabbing a bite to eat? Meaning, do you want to eat?
And notice how feel like is followed by a verb ending in ing.
Come over is explained as meaning come to my house. And notes here refers to class notes.
Basic stuff, but good to clarify for language learners.
All right, next scenario is shopping. The salesperson asks, can I help you? Or may I help you? Which are standard greetings in a store.
They're just being polite and offering assistance.
The customer replies, I'm looking for a sweater, meaning they're browsing.
They don't have a specific sweater in mind, they're just exploring.
They mention size medium as a basic clothing size. The customer says, let's see, while looking at the options.
It's like they're thinking out loud.
They prefer a different color. I'd rather have it in blue. The salesperson asks, would you like to try it on? Which is a polite way to offer a fitting room.
It's all about making the customer feel comfortable.
Customer asks, how much is it? Stressing is. And finally, I'll take it, meaning I'll buy it.
Those are essential phrases for shopping.
Okay, last stop on our tour around town is transportation. The speakers wonder, should we take the bus or a taxi? Using should we, or to ask for an opinion. Notice the upward inflection on bus and downward on taxi.
It clearly presents the two options.
They decide, let's take the bus. It's short for let us, and means I think we could do this. They redefine rush hour with specific morning and evening times, noting the stress on the first word because it's a compound noun.
Yeah, compound nouns usually have the stress on the first word.
They ask, isn't there a bus stop near here? Which is a negative question, expecting a yes answer. Bus stop, another compound noun with stress on the first word.
They're pretty sure there's a stop nearby, just confirming.
But then, oh, followed by, oh no, they just missed the bus.
Summer.
We just missed it, emphasizing just to show how close they were. And the response, no problem here, means it's okay, it doesn't matter.
Just trying to be positive.
Okay, time for our final section, pastimes and activities. We start with, how old are you? Patty says, I'm really excited about my birthday party, emphasizing really to make excited stronger.
Yeah, really adds that extra oomph.
We see the normal stress on birthday and birthday party, and then a negative tag question, aren't you? Which expects a yes answer.
Just double checking, making sure everyone's on the same page.
She answers, I'm going to be 55, stressing 55 because that's the important info. They also talk about how to pronounce ordinal numbers like 14th and 40th, which can be tricky.
Yeah, those sounds can be tough.
And they point out the contraction gonna for going to.
Super common in spoken English.
Next up, at the movies, they talk about the 3.30 show, meaning the movie starting at that time with stress on 3.30. Sue says, enjoy the movie, with a friendly upward inflection on movie.
It's like a nice little send-off.
Jim asks, would you mind moving over one? Which is a polite way to ask someone to move the seat. They contrast it with, would you mind if I moved over one? Which has a slightly different meaning.
Yeah, the first one is asking for permission. The second one is more like informing them of what you're going to do.
Right, good point. And they explain that moving over one just means moving one seat. The polite response is, no, not at all, meaning I don't mind.
It's all about those social niceties.
And what are you good at? We start with that drawn out so, which can indicate boredom. Then we see really good at, where really emphasizes good. And they point out the contraction, what I for what do you.
Yeah, we love our contractions in spoken English.
Comes up again, showing Bob's thinking. He suggests, how about trying a new restaurant? Using how about for suggestion. Then he gets more assertive, let's go bowling, and we have the playful, oh yeah, we'll see about that, with emphasis on that.
A little bit of friendly competition.
Okay, what's your favorite sport? David asks, what time is that soccer game on? Which is another way to say, when does it start? Notice the pattern, what time, plus something, plus on. Jake says, I much prefer basketball, stressing much to show a strong preference. And, oh, really? With upward inflection shows surprise.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, I didn't expect you to say that.
Totally. Jake says, I'm a big fan of basketball, which is a casual way to say he likes it a lot. Then he suggests having a game of basketball, meaning, let's play. They agree enthusiastically, sure thing. And lastly, they mention shoot some hoops, which is informal for playing a casual game.
Sounds fun.
In A Night at the Theater, we hear, you are welcome, as a response to thank you, contrasted with more casual responses like, don't mention it. They also talk about how to accept compliments, that's very kind of you, versus downplaying them, oh, I wasn't that good. And we see the use of superlatives, the best play I've seen, and the phrase, I'm a fan of, again.
It's interesting how cultural norms influence how we give and receive compliments.
Yeah, for sure. In taking a vacation, we're reminded that ticket can refer to various forms of transportation depending on the context, and they define a red eye as a late-night flight.
The kind that leaves you feeling exhausted.
Totally. Next up, at the pet store, the customer exclaims, oh, what a beautiful cat, with oh for surprise and what a to express a strong opinion. They compare dogs and cats. Dogs are more loyal than cats, noting the stress on the key words.
Yeah, we tend to emphasize the words that are most important for the comparison.
They say every single day, stressing each word for emphasis. Good point is a way to agree. They explain the phrasal verb take care of and its various uses. And finally, they mention the casual, yeah, you're right, where the words blend together a bit.
That's very typical of fast, informal speech.
Giving your opinion focuses on decide and the idiom to make up my mind. They use how about going to a museum to present an alternative. And they discuss the verbs think, believe, suppose, and assume, noting the subtle differences in meaning.
Yeah, those words aren't always interchangeable.
In hobbies, they mention university terms like midterm exams and finals. They also point out the common contractions gonna, wanna, and hafta, noting that they're spoken, not written forms. And lastly, they define awesome as a slang term for excellent.
So much informal language packed into one dialogue.
Okay, last one. Weddings. We see a negative question expecting a yes answer. Doesn't the bride look beautiful?
It's a way to express your own opinion while also seeking agreement.
They note the stress on honeymoon, a culturally significant word. Tie the knot is a slang term for get married. And they revisit the two main uses of just.